The news of Eddard Stark's execution spread across the north like a winter storm. Robb Stark did not cry when he heard it. He did not scream. He just stood there in his war tent, staring at the table where the map of Westeros lay open. His jaw tightened. His fingers pressed into the wood until his knuckles turned white. They called him king in the north now. The banners of the direwolf flew high. The northern lords shouted his name. They wanted revenge. They wanted Lannister blood. But Robb knew something most of them did not want to admit. The North alone could not win this war. Tywin Lannister was not foolish. He had gold, armies, alliances, and worse than that, he had patience. Robb had already won battles. He had humiliated Jaime Lannister and taken him captive, but winning battles was not the same as winning a war. That night, Catelyn Stark entered his tent quietly. "You are thinking too loudly," she said softly. Robb gave a faint smile. "I was thinking the same thing Father would have." "And what is that?" "That we need more than courage." She studied him carefully. "You're thinking about the Baratheon brothers." Robb nodded. Renly had crowned himself king in the south with a massive army behind him, but Renly loved glory more than strategy, and Stannis was different. Cold, rigid, unbending. But rightful. "Stannis is the true heir," Robb said. "If what Father discovered was true, Joffrey is no king." Catelyn hesitated. "The northern lords crowned you." "They crowned me because they were angry," Robb replied quietly, "because they wanted blood, but a crown does not mean I must keep it." The words felt heavy even as he said them. Bending the knee would look like weakness. The North had not knelt to southern kings for centuries. Pride ran deep in northern blood. But pride had killed his father. 2 weeks later, a raven flew south under heavy guard. The message was simple. Robb Stark offered terms. He would recognize Stannis Baratheon as the rightful king of the Seven Kingdoms. In return, the North would remain largely independent, keeping its traditions and its rule under House Stark, and together they would crush the Lannisters. When Stannis received the message at Dragonstone, he read it twice. His jaw tightened. "He offers fealty," one of his captains asked. "He offers strategy," Stannis answered coldly. Beside him stood the Red Woman, Melisandre, the fire in the brazier reflected in her red eyes. "The wolf seeks the stag," she murmured. "It is written in the flames." Stannis did not look at her. Flames show many things, most of them lies. But he was thinking. Robb Stark had already proven himself on the battlefield. The boy was bold, perhaps too bold, but useful, very useful. Still, Stannis did not like sharing power. He believed in order, in law, in rightful claim, and by law the North belonged to the Iron Throne. There would be no equal alliance. There would be loyalty. Weeks later, on a rocky stretch of coast near Storm's End, the two armies finally faced each other. Northern banners flapped in the wind, direwolves against crowned stags. The meeting took place in a guarded pavilion between both camps. Robb entered first, wearing armor but no crown. Grey Wind walked beside him, silent and watchful. Stannis entered moments later. His presence felt heavier than his frame. Hard eyes, hard mouth, a man carved from stone. They stood across from each other in silence. "So," Stannis said, voice flat, "the king in the north." "Robb Stark," Robb corrected calmly, "son of Eddard Stark." A pause. "You do not wear your crown," Stannis observed. "I did not come as your equal," Robb replied. That caught the attention of every man in the tent. Stannis studied him carefully. "Speak plainly, boy." Robb did not flinch at the word. "My father died because he trusted the wrong people. I will not make that mistake. You are the rightful king. Joffrey is a bastard born of incest. The realm knows it, even if they whisper." Stannis' eyes sharpened. "I will bend the knee," Robb continued, his voice steady though his heart pounded, "if you swear to bring justice to the Lannisters." if you swear to respect the North and its rule under House Stark." The words hung in the air. Outside, wind howled against the canvas. Stannis walked slowly around the table between them. "You were crowned by your lords. If you kneel now, you risk their anger." "I risk their anger," Robb said quietly, "so they don't die for nothing." For the first time, something flickered in Stannis' eyes, not warmth, but respect. "You are young," Stannis said, "but not foolish." He stopped directly in front of Robb. "I will accept your fealty. The North will remain under House Stark so long as you remain loyal. Together, we march against the Lannisters." Robb lowered himself onto one knee. Grey wind growled softly, but did not move. "I, Robb of House Stark, pledge fealty to Stannis of House Baratheon, the first of his name, rightful king of the Andals and the first men." The alliance was sealed. But not everyone was pleased. Among the northern lords, whispers began almost immediately. Some called it wisdom, others called it weakness. And far away in King's Landing, Tywin Lannister received the news with narrowed eyes. "The wolf joins the stag," he murmured. This was not good. Two disciplined armies, one fighting for vengeance, one fighting for a crown. And both led by men who did not forgive. The war had just changed. And this time, the Red Wedding might not be the bloodiest thing Westeros would see. The alliance changed everything faster than anyone expected. When word spread that Robb Stark had bent the knee to Stannis Baratheon, the North did not erupt in cheers. It erupted in arguments. Inside Riverrun's great hall, northern lords shouted over one another. Great Jon Umber slammed his fist against the table so hard that cups of ale spilled across the wood. "We crowned him," Great Jon roared. "We bled for him, and now he kneels to a southern king who burns men alive." Roose Bolton stood quietly near the back, pale eyes unreadable. "It was a practical choice," he said smoothly. "Practical men survive wars." "Practical men betray kings," Great Jon snapped. Catelyn watched all of this in silence. She knew this moment would come. Pride ran deep in northern veins. They did not kneel easily. When Robb entered the hall, the noise slowly died down. He looked older than he had weeks ago. The weight of a crown had been replaced by the weight of something heavier, responsibility without glory. "I know what you're thinking," Robb began. "You think I gave away your crown." "You did," someone muttered. Robb didn't react. "We can win battles alone. We cannot win the war alone. Tywin Lannister still commands the largest army in the realm. King's Landing still stands, and Renly's supporters are scattered but not gone." He looked around the hall, meeting each pair of eyes. "Stannis has ships, discipline, claim. Together we force the Lannisters to fight on two fronts. Together we break them." "And when the war is done," Great Jon asked harshly, "what stops this Baratheon from turning his armies north?" Robb didn't hesitate. "Honor." The hall grew quiet. Even saying the word sounded fragile. Far to the south, on Dragonstone, Stannis was having his own problems. Not everyone in his camp welcomed the wolf either. Sir Davos Seaworth stood beside Stannis as ships were prepared for departure. The wind off the sea was cold and sharp. "You trust him?" Davos asked quietly. "I trust his hatred of the Lannisters," Stannis replied. "That's not the same thing." "No," Stannis agreed, "but it's enough." Behind them, Melisandre watched the northern banners being sewn beside Baratheon standards. Red silk flickered in the sunlight. "The Lord of Light favors this union," she said softly. "I have seen it in the flames. The lion burns, the stag survives." Stannis did not look convinced. "Flames can lie." "They do not lie," she whispered. "Men do." Days later, the combined forces began their first coordinated move. Robb would hold the Riverlands and pressure Tywin's movements. Stannis would sail for Blackwater Bay and strike King's Landing before the Lannisters could regroup. It was bold. Maybe too bold. Tywin Lannister received reports in the Tower of the Hand. He stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back. They move separately but think as one, a messenger said nervously. Tywin's face did not change. Stannis will attack King's Landing. Yes, my lord. And Stark. He fortifies the riverlands, blocking our supply lines. Tywin nodded slowly. The boy learns quickly. Tyrion Lannister, acting hand in his father's absence, was already preparing wildfire defenses in the capital. He had expected Stannis to attack. He had not expected Robb to remove the distraction in the west so cleanly. This is what happens when pride takes a holiday, Tyrion muttered to himself. They start thinking. Back in the Riverlands, Robb met privately with Roose Bolton. You are uneasy, Robb observed. Roose gave a thin smile. I am cautious. About Stannis. About alliances built on necessity rather than loyalty. Robb held his gaze. You think he'll betray us? I think, Roose said softly, that kings do not like sharing victories. Robb dismissed the thought. We fight for justice, that matters. Roose bowed slightly. Of course, my king. But as he left the tent, his pale eyes flickered with something colder than caution. Meanwhile, Stannis' fleet cut through the waters toward King's Landing. The night before the assault, Melisandre approached Stannis again. There is a darkness around the wolf, she said, a choice yet to be made. Stannis frowned. Speak clearly. If victory comes, it will demand sacrifice. War always does. Her red eyes glowed in the torchlight. Not soldiers, something greater. Stannis turned away. I will not burn northern boys for your god. You may not have to, she said quietly. The next day, the Battle of Blackwater began. Wildfire lit the bay in green flame, ships exploded, men screamed, smoke swallowed the sky. But this time, it was different. Because Robb Stark was not trapped in the west chasing rumors of Tywin, he had anticipated the Lannister reinforcements. When Tywin marched south to relieve the city, he found northern forces blocking key crossings. The two armies clashed near the Trident. Steel rang against steel, direwolves howled, the Riverlands became a slaughterhouse. Robb fought at the front, cutting through Lannister soldiers with controlled fury. He wasn't reckless, he was focused. Tywin watched from a distant hill, calculating. This alliance, he muttered, must be broken. If Stannis failed at Blackwater, the North would stand alone again. If Robb fell here, Stannis would lose half his strength. So Tywin made a decision. He sent secret riders west to the twins, to Walder Frey. Because if swords could not break the wolf and the stag, perhaps betrayal could. And this time, the cost would be even higher. The Battle of Blackwater did not end the way history once told it. The wildfire still burned bright green across the bay, ships still exploded into splinters, men still drowned in armor too heavy for survival. But this time, Stannis Baratheon was not standing alone when the smoke began to clear. Because Tywin Lannister never reached the city in time. Robb Stark had made sure of that. Near the Trident, the northern army struck with cold precision. They did not charge blindly. They did not roar with wild fury. They fought like winter itself, slow, patient, and deadly. Tywin watched his vanguard collapse under Stark pressure. His commanders shouted for reinforcements that never came fast enough. Every hour delayed was another hour Stannis' battered kings landing without relief. For the first time in a long while, Tywin Lannister felt something close to concern. Back at Blackwater Bay, the fighting had turned brutal. Stannis himself had landed on the shores, sword in hand, cutting through gold cloaks and Lannister men alike. He did not shout, he did not boast, he simply advanced. Forward, he barked, forward. Tyrion Lannister fought desperately along the walls, rallying defenders. But without Tywin's cavalry charging in at the last moment, the city's morale began to crack. The gates fell just before dawn. King's Landing did not burn completely, but it bled. By sunrise, Baratheon banners hung from the Red Keep. Joffrey Baratheon was dragged from Meagher's holdfast screaming, his crown knocked crooked. Cersei Lannister was found in the throne room, pale but defiant. When Stannis entered the hall and saw the Iron Throne before him, he did not smile. "This seat is mine by right," he said calmly. Joffrey spat at his feet. It was the last mistake the boy king would ever make. Stannis did not hesitate. Justice in his mind was simple, clean, necessary. The execution was swift. Word traveled north like thunder. The Lannister hold on the throne was broken. But victory did not bring peace. When Robb received the raven confirming King's Landing had fallen, relief washed over his camp. Soldiers cheered. The Riverlords praised his strategy. But Roose Bolton did not cheer. Instead, he approached Robb quietly. "The lion is wounded," Roose said, "not dead." Robb nodded. "Tywin still commands forces in the west." "And the Reach," Roose continued. "They supported Renly. Now that Stannis sits the throne, do you think they will kneel easily?" Robb knew the answer. No. The war was shifting, not ending. Days later, Robb rode south to meet Stannis in King's Landing. The city still smelled of smoke and blood. Burned ships drifted in the bay like broken bones. When Robb entered the throne room, he noticed how silent it was. Stannis sat on the Iron Throne, rigid and uncomfortable. The twisted blades seemed to cut into his back even as he ruled from it. Robb knelt again, this time not for negotiation, but acknowledgement. "You have done what you promised," Robb said. "And you," Stannis replied, "delayed my enemies long enough to win." There was no warmth in the exchange, only mutual recognition. Catelyn Stark observed the room carefully. So did Davos Seaworth, and in the shadows near a pillar stood Melisandre, her red robes like a drop of blood against stone. She was watching Robb. Not with hatred, with calculation. That night, a private council was held. Tywin Lannister had retreated to Casterly Rock. The Westerlands were fortifying. The Tyrells had not yet declared open loyalty to Stannis. "We must crush Tywin completely," Robb urged, "end his house's power." "We will," Stannis said, "but first the realm must bend." Robb frowned slightly. "The North has already bent." "Yes," Stannis said flatly, "the rest have not." That was when the tension began. Stannis demanded oaths from every great house, immediate submission, taxes restored, faith of the Seven diminished in favor of the Lord of Light. That last demand did not sit well. Not with the Reach, not with the Stormlands, and certainly not with the North. Later, alone in the courtyard, Robb found Davos watching the sunset. "You look troubled," Davos said gently. "Stannis won the throne," Robb replied, "but I don't think he understands what it takes to keep it." Davos sighed. "He understands law, not love." Robb looked back toward the Red Keep. "The North will not burn their gods." "No," Davos agreed, "they won't." Inside the castle, Melisandre stood before Stannis once more. "There is unrest," she said. "There is always unrest," Stannis answered. "The wolf's loyalty is strong, but loyalty can crack." Stannis's jaw tightened. He bent the knee. "And if the flames demand more," she whispered. He turned sharply. "You speak too much of flames." She stepped closer. "Because they show me a choice, a sacrifice that would secure your reign forever." Stannis did not respond. But somewhere deep inside, doubt had begun to grow. Meanwhile, in the west, Tywin Lannister received news of his grandson's execution. For the first time, grief crossed his face. Then it hardened into something colder. "They think the war is won," he said quietly. He summoned a Maester. "Send word to the Reach." And then, after a pause, "And to the Dreadfort." Far in the north, House Bolton's banners stirred in the wind. Because alliances built on necessity are strong in battle, but fragile in victory. And victory had just planted the seeds of the next betrayal. Victory changed the shape of the war, but it also changed the shape of men. King's Landing was quieter now, not peaceful, just quiet in the way a battlefield is quiet after the screaming stops. The Iron Throne had a new king sitting on it, but the realm did not feel stable. It felt tense, like a bowstring pulled too tight. Robb Stark stayed in the capital longer than he wanted. He hated the smell of the city, hated the whispers in the halls. In the north, men said what they meant. In King's Landing, every word carried a hidden blade. Stannis ruled exactly as people feared he would. Strictly, coldly, without compromise. Several lords who hesitated to swear loyalty found themselves stripped of lands. A few outspoken septons who condemned the growing influence of the Lord of Light were arrested. Red priests began appearing in the streets, preaching about a single true God. The small folk watched in silence. One evening, Robb stood on the battlements overlooking Blackwater Bay when Catelyn joined him. "You've done what your father would have done," she said gently. Robb didn't look convinced. "Father believed in justice. I'm not sure this feels like justice." "You stopped the Lannisters." "Yes," he said, "but what did we start?" Below them, a group of red-robed followers lit torches in the courtyard. Catelyn followed his gaze. "The North will not accept this faith." "I know. And if Stannis demands it?" Robb didn't answer. Because he didn't know. Inside the Red Keep, tensions were growing sharper. The Tyrells had finally made their move. A raven arrived bearing the golden rose of Highgarden. They offered conditional loyalty to the crown, marriage alliances, trade agreements, and protection for the faith of the Seven. Stannis read the letter twice. "They bargain," he said flatly. Davos stood nearby. "They're powerful, rich, their grain feeds half the realm." "They supported Renly," Stannis replied. "Traitors." "They supported who they thought would win." Stannis' eyes narrowed. "I am king, they will kneel without condition." But that was the problem. Stannis demanded obedience. The realm expected negotiation. That night, Melisandre approached him once more. "The flames grow restless," she whispered. "I am tired of flames," Stannis said. "You should not be," she replied calmly. "They show me danger, a shadow wearing flayed skin." Stannis stiffened slightly. "Bolton." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. Roose Bolton had returned north weeks earlier, citing the need to secure Stark lands and ensure order. Robb had allowed it. It seemed reasonable at the time. Now it felt premature. Meanwhile, in the Riverlands, Robb received a letter sealed with a flayed man. Roose Bolton's message was polite, calm, informative. He spoke of unrest among certain northern houses, of whispers that Robb had surrendered too much, of fear that southern influence would corrupt the north. Robb read it twice, then a third time. Grey wind paced restlessly beside him. "Something feels wrong," Robb muttered. Bolton's tone was loyal. Too loyal. Catelyn entered the tent shortly after. "Another letter?" she asked. "From Roose. And he says the north is stable." Catelyn's eyes sharpened. "Is it?" Robb hesitated. Because reports from White Harbor spoke of unease. The Karstarks were still bitter over past executions. The Umbers felt insulted by the bending of the knee. And now rumors spread that Stannis intended to place royal overseers in major castles, including Winterfell. That was not part of their agreement. Robb requested an immediate audience with Stannis. When they met in the throne room again, the tone had shifted. "You intend to send royal justiciars north?" Robb asked directly. To ensure loyalty, Stannis replied. You already have loyalty. I have words, Stannis corrected. Loyalty is proven through obedience. Robb's jaw tightened. The North governs itself, that was our agreement. The North is part of my kingdom. And Winterfell is my home. The air between them felt colder than the wall. Davos watched silently, worry deep in his eyes. Melisandre stood in the shadows again. Watching. Always watching. Stannis leaned forward slightly on the throne. You swore fealty. I did, Robb said firmly, not submission. The distinction mattered to him. It did not seem to matter to Stannis. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Two leaders. Two stubborn wills. Bound by necessity. Finally, Stannis said, the realm must be unified. I will not allow division. And I will not allow the North to be treated like conquered land, Robb answered. That was the moment something cracked. Not loudly, not visibly, but it cracked. Later that night, Davos approached Robb privately. You must be careful, Davos warned softly. His sense of justice leaves no room for pride. And mine, Robb asked. Davos gave a sad smile. Yours leaves little room for surrender. Far to the north, at the Dreadfort, Roose Bolton received a rider from the west. The message was brief. From Tywin Lannister. An offer. Gold titles, Warden of the North. In exchange for a simple thing. Divide the wolf from the stag. Roose folded the letter carefully. Outside, snow began to fall. War had been won in King's Landing. But in the shadows, a colder war was beginning. And this one would not be fought with armies alone. Snow fell early that year in the north. Not heavy at first, just thin white streaks across grey skis, but men who had lived their whole lives beneath northern winds knew what it meant. Winter was coming, and winter did not care who sat on the Iron Throne. At the Dreadfort, Roose Bolton stood by a narrow window, watching the snow gather along the courtyard stones. In his pale hand rested Tywin Lannister's letter. Warden of the North. The title had weight, more weight than loyalty. He did not smile, Roose rarely smiled, but something inside him settled. He had served Robb Stark well in battle, he had obeyed, he had waited. Now the boy was no longer king in the north. He was a southern king's vassal. And vassals could be replaced. Roose summoned a maester. Prepare a response, he said calmly, to Casterly Rock. Meanwhile, Robb Stark had finally left King's Landing. The capital felt like a cage. Every corridor carried whispers. Every noble seemed to bow with half a heart. Even the Iron Throne itself looked uncomfortable under Stannis. Robb rode north with part of his host, intending to stabilize the Riverlands before returning fully to Winterfell. He told himself it was strategy. But deep down, he simply wanted distance. Catelyn rode beside him one evening as they made camp near Harrenhal. You and Stannis are drifting apart, she said quietly. Robb did not deny it. He sees loyalty as obedience. And you? I see loyalty as trust. Catelyn sighed, both are dangerous. That night, a raven arrived. Not from the Dreadfort. From White Harbour. Lord Manderly warned of strange movements, Bolton men travelling between keeps, quiet meetings, supplies shifting. And more troubling, rumours spreading among smallfolk that Stannis planned to replace northern gods with fire priests. Robb crushed the parchment in his fist. That was never agreed, he muttered. The problem was not only Stannis' actions. It was perception. And perception was becoming poison. Back in King's Landing, Stannis held council. Reports from the Reach were frustrating. The Tyrells delayed formal submission. They demanded marriage alliances, positions at court, guarantees for the faith. Stannis refused. "I will not buy loyalty," he said. "You may need to," Davos replied gently. Stannis's gaze hardened. "The throne is mine by right, they will kneel." Melisandre stepped forward. "There is another path," she said softly. Davos immediately stiffened. "No," Stannis warned. "You have seen what sacrifice can achieve," she pressed. "The flames promise security, permanence, an end to rebellion." "What sacrifice?" Davos demanded sharply. Melisandre's eyes flickered like firelight. "The wolf's blood carries power." The room went silent. Stannis stood slowly from the throne. "I will not murder my ally," he said, voice dangerously low. Melisandre did not flinch. Allies can become threats. Davos stepped between them. "Robb Stark won you this throne." "Yes," Melisandre said calmly, "and perhaps his purpose is fulfilled." Stannis turned away, jaw tight. But doubt had already begun to grow. Far north, the true game was unfolding. Roose Bolton moved carefully. He did not declare rebellion, not yet. Instead, he began planting ideas. That Robb had abandoned northern independence. That Winterfell would soon house southern officials. That taxes would increase. That the old gods would be pushed aside. Fear spreads faster than truth, especially in winter. The Karstarks, still bitter over past grievances, began speaking openly of dissatisfaction. The Umbers grumbled louder than before. Smaller houses watched, uncertain. And then came the final spark. A royal decree arrived at Winterfell, signed by King Stannis. It announced the appointment of a royal justiciar to oversee northern taxation and ensure compliance with crown law. The name attached to the decree was Southern, not Stark, not Northern. When Robb received word of the decree, he felt something break inside his chest. He had trusted Stannis. He had bent the knee for unity. And now the North would see this as proof of surrender. Catelyn watched her son carefully as he read the message. "What will you do?" she asked. Robb stared at the fire. "If I defy him, I break my oath. And if you obey, I lose my people." The choice felt impossible. Days later, another raven came. This one sealed with flayed skin. Roose Bolton reported unrest growing dangerous. He advised that perhaps the North required firmer leadership to maintain stability under the crown. Robb read between the lines. Bolton was positioning himself. At the same time, in the West, Tywin Lannister prepared quietly. He had lost the throne. He had lost his grandson. But he had not lost his patience. Gold moved north, promises followed. Divide the alliance. Break the trust. Let the stag and the wolf turn on each other. Because if they did, the lion would rise again. And in the Red Keep, Stannis stood alone before the Iron Throne late one night. He stared at it for a long time. "Why does ruling feel like losing?" he muttered to himself. From the shadows, Melisandre's voice answered softly. "Because victory demands more fire." Far away, snow thickened over the north. Armies rested. But beneath the silence, betrayal was taking shape. And soon, Robb Stark would be forced to choose between his oath and his blood. Winter did not arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, like doubt in a loyal heart. By the time Robb Stark crossed back into the Neck, snow covered the roads thick enough to slow supply wagons. The air felt sharper, colder, almost warning him. He could feel it. The North was different. Villages still welcomed him, small folk still bowed, but the cheers were quieter than before. Eyes watched him longer, questions hung unspoken. "Did you give us away?" At Winterfell, The great gates opened with the familiar groan of old wood and iron. For a moment, Robb felt like a boy again, riding home after training. But he was not a boy anymore. And this was not the same home. Inside the hall, the northern lords gathered. Great John Umber stood with crossed arms. Rickard Karstark's kin glared openly. Even men who had once shouted "King" in the north now held their tongues. Robb stood before them. "I bent the knee to win the war," he began. Murmurs followed. "And we won," he continued. "The Lannisters are broken, Joffrey is dead, the throne no longer belongs to a bastard." "Aye," Greatjon said roughly, "but does it belong to us?" The words hit harder than any sword. Robb stepped forward. "The North remains under House Stark, that was the agreement." "And the royal justiciar," someone shouted. Silence fell. Robb did not look away. "I did not request it." "But you allowed it," another voice said. That was the problem. He had not known. But ignorance was not strength. Outside Winterfell, Bolton banners flew alongside Stark ones. Roose Bolton had arrived days earlier to ensure order. He stood near a pillar, pale and calm. "The North fears losing itself," Roose said smoothly. "Fear makes men restless." Robb turned toward him. "What are you suggesting?" "That reassurance may not be enough." That night, Robb walked the battlements alone. Snow fell softly around him. Grey wind padded quietly at his side. He had thought victory would feel lighter, cleaner. Instead, it felt like standing on cracking ice. Footsteps approached. "Catelyn, you're carrying too much alone," she said. "I swore an oath," Robb replied. "If I defy Stannis, I am no better than the Lannisters. And if Stannis breaks faith first?" Robb didn't answer. Because he knew the truth. Stannis had not meant to insult the North. But intention did not erase consequence. Far south, in King's Landing, Stannis received troubling reports. "Bolton strengthens his forces," Davos said carefully, "and there are rumors he questions Stark leadership." Stannis' jaw tightened. Then Stark must control his bannermen. Davos hesitated. Perhaps sending the Justiciar north was premature. It was necessary. Necessary does not always mean wise. Stannis did not appreciate that. Before he could respond, Melisandre stepped forward. "The flames show division," she said softly. "If the wolf and the stag turn on each other, darkness wins." "I will not be threatened by shadows," Stannis replied. "You misunderstand," she said calmly. "The threat is not the wolf." "Then who?" Her red eyes seemed almost alive in the torchlight. "The flayed man." Back in Winterfell, Roose Bolton moved carefully. He did not raise banners in rebellion. He whispered. He visited smaller houses first, promised stability, protection from southern interference, a north led by strength, not compromise. And he planted one final seed. That Robb Stark had grown weak. That bending the knee once meant he could do it again. The breaking point came with the arrival of the royal justiciar. A southern knight rode into Winterfell under Baratheon banners, escorted by a small guard. He carried official documents bearing Stannis' seal. He spoke politely, but his words carried authority. "By decree of King Stannis Baratheon," he announced in the Great Hall, "I am to review taxation and ensure compliance with crown law." The hall erupted. Greatjon's hand went to his sword. Karstark men muttered darkly. Robb raised his hand for silence. "You will conduct your review," Robb said carefully, "as a guest of Winterfell, nothing more." The knight bowed stiffly. But the damage was done. Later that evening, Robb confronted Roose privately. "You've been speaking against me." Roose's expression did not change. "I have been calming fears. By feeding them." "I serve the North," Roose replied softly, "as you do." It sounded like agreement. It felt like a threat. Meanwhile, in the west, Tywin Lannister prepared his final move. He knew Bolton's ambition, he understood pride, and he understood timing. A message was sent north again. If the flayed man rose against the direwolf, the lion would support him quietly. Not openly. Not yet. Just enough to tip the balance. Winter deepened. Food stores were counted carefully, supplies rationed, armies restless. One night, a rider arrived at Winterfell under heavy snow. He carried terrible news. Bolton men had seized control of several minor keeps in the north, claiming it was to protect them from instability. Robb felt the ground shift beneath him. This was no longer whispers. It was action. Catelyn looked at her son with fear she tried to hide. "If you move against Bolton," she said quietly, "the North will blade." "If I don't," Robb replied, "we lose it anyway." Far away in King's Landing, Stannis stood before the Iron Throne once more. "The North destabilizes," a messenger reported. Stannis' face hardened. "Then we march," he said. Davos looked alarmed. March against whom? Against rebellion. But the question lingered. Rebellion against the crown? Or against a king who had asked too much? Snow swallowed the roads between north and south. Armies began to stir. And for the first time since their alliance began, Robb Stark and Stannis Baratheon stood on opposite sides of a coming storm. The North did not explode into war overnight. It cracked, slowly, quietly, like ice splitting beneath heavy weight. Robb moved first, not with banners raised in rebellion, but with Stark men sent quietly to reclaim the minor keeps Bolton forces had secured. He sent ravens to loyal houses, reminding them of old oaths sworn to Winterfell long before southern kings ever cared about northern snow. But Roose Bolton had been preparing for this moment far longer. When Stark men approached the seized keeps, they were met not with confusion, but with organized resistance. Bolton banners rose higher. And then came the letter. Sealed in flayed skin. Roose's words were calm, almost gentle. For the stability of the North, and in loyalty to King Stannis Baratheon, House Bolton would temporarily assume military command until unrest was resolved. It was clever. He did not accuse Robb of treason. He accused him of weakness. That was worse. Winterfell's great hall filled once more with shouting lords. "He moves against you openly now," Great John roared. Karstark men demanded blood. Others hesitated, because Roose claimed loyalty to the Iron Throne. If Robb attacked him, would that make Robb the rebel? Catelyn saw the trap immediately. "He's forcing you into defiance," she whispered. Robb's hands clenched at his sides. "He wants me to look like the Oathbreaker." "And Stannis?" she asked. That was the hardest part, because word had already reached King's Landing. And Stannis Baratheon did what he always did when faced with disorder. He chose law over relationship. In the Red Keep, Stannis listened to reports of northern conflict. Davos stood beside him, tense. "Bolton claims he acts in your name," the messenger said. Stannis' jaw tightened. "I gave him no such authority." "But he claims Stark has lost control." Silence fell. Davos stepped forward. "Your Grace, this is what Tywin wanted, division." "I will not tolerate rebellion," Stannis said. "Then send a letter," Davos urged. "Clarify your support for Stark." Before Stannis could answer, Melisandre spoke softly from the shadows. "The flames grow darker," she said. "Blood calls for blood." Stannis closed his eyes briefly. "When kings appear weak," he said slowly, "realms fracture." "So stand with Stark," Davos pressed. But Stannis hesitated. because Robb had already shown resistance over the Justicia, over the Crown's authority, over unity. And in Stannis' mind, divided loyalty was dangerous. He made his decision. A royal decree was drafted. It commanded both Stark and Bolton to cease hostilities immediately and present themselves for judgment before the Iron Throne. Neutral, lawful, cold. When the decree reached Winterfell, Robb read it in silence. "Present myself," he muttered, "in the middle of this." Greatjon slammed his fist against a pillar. "If you leave now, Bolton takes the north." Catelyn's voice was steady but urgent. "If you refuse, Stannis may name you traitor." Robb felt the walls closing in. He had bent the knee to avoid war on two fronts. Now he faced it anyway. Meanwhile, Roose Bolton received the same decree. He smiled faintly for the first time in weeks. Because this was exactly what he wanted. If Robb rode south, Bolton would consolidate power. If Robb refused, Stannis would be forced to act. Either way, the wolf stood alone. Snowstorms worsened, supply lines grew fragile, smaller houses began choosing sides openly now. Some stayed loyal to Stark. Others, fearing southern retaliation, aligned with Bolton. The north was dividing. And far in the west, Tywin Lannister watched reports arrive with quiet satisfaction. "They destroy each other," he murmured. His bannermen waited for orders. "Not yet," Tywin said softly. "Let them bleed first." Back at Winterfell, Robb made his choice. He would not ride south. Instead, he sent a raven to Stannis. His message was clear. "The north faces internal treachery. I remain loyal to my oath, but I will not abandon my lands to answer false accusations." It was respectful, but it was defiance. When Stannis read the reply, anger flashed across his face. He chooses absence over obedience. Davos tried once more. He chooses defense of his home. "A king's command is not optional," Stannis said sharply. Melisandre stepped closer. "The flames whisper of a final test," she murmured. "The wolf must either kneel fully or burn." Stannis stared at the Iron Throne. He had fought for it his entire life. Lost brothers, lost men, lost blood. Now even his strongest ally resisted him. "Prepare the fleet," he said finally. Davos froze. "Your Grace, I will sail north. Not to destroy. Not yet. But to remind the realm who ruled it." In Winterfell, scouts reported movement along the eastern coast. Baratheon sails. Robb stood atop the battlements, snow whipping against his face. Behind him, Bolton forces gathered in the west. Ahead of him, the king he had helped crown was coming north with an army. He had wanted unity. He had wanted justice. Instead, he had built a throne for a man who did not bend. And now the north would pay for it. Grey wind growled low beside him. Robb rested a hand on the direwolf's head. "Looks like we chose the wrong war," he whispered. The storm was no longer coming. It was here. The storm did not ask permission before it arrived. Baratheon sails cut through the icy waters off White Harbor under dark skies. Soldiers marched south of Winterfell under flayed banners, and in the middle of it all stood Robb Stark, no longer a crowned king, not fully a loyal subject, and not yet a rebel. Just a man surrounded by consequences. Stannis did not come north with wildfire or burning stakes. He came with law. His army camped several miles from Winterfell, no siege engines raised, no immediate attack, just presence, cold and heavy as iron. When Robb rode out to meet him beneath grey skis, snow crunching under hoof, the silence between their armies felt worse than battle drums. They met between lines again. Just like the first time. But this time, neither man was offering alliance. "You ignored my summons," Stannis said without greeting. "I defended my home," Robb replied evenly. "You defied your king. I upheld my duty." The words struck like steel. Behind them, Bolton forces gathered further west, watching carefully. Roose had not moved openly against either side. He waited, patient as frostbite. Stannis looked at the banners behind Robb, fewer than before. "The North fractures under your command," Stannis said. "It fractures because it fears losing itself. It fears weakness." Robb's voice hardened. "It fears being ruled from a throne that does not understand it." That was the closest he had come to open accusation. Davos watched both men with deep worry. He knew this was the edge of something irreversible. Stannis stepped closer. "I gave you respect. I honored your house." "You appointed southern rule over my lands without counsel," Robb answered. "Because unity requires structure, and loyalty requires trust." There it was again. Law versus trust. Iron versus blood. Before either could say more, a rider approached at full speed from the west. Bolton colors. He dismounted roughly and knelt. "My lords," he said urgently, "House Bolton moves on Winterfell. They claim to secure it from instability." Both armies turned toward the distant smoke, rising faintly on the horizon. Roose had made his move. Not against one of them. Against both. "He forces our hands," Robb muttered. Stannis' jaw tightened. "He dares." Melisandre, standing near Stannis' guard, whispered, "The flayed man shows his true skin." For a long moment, Robb and Stannis simply looked at each other. Everything they had built was cracking. And suddenly, the choice was simple. Not pride. Not lure. Survival. Robb spoke first. "If we fight each other now, Bolton wins." Stannis did not hesitate long this time. "Then we finish this together." It was not warm reconciliation. It was necessity reborn. The combined armies marched immediately. Bolton forces had expected Stark resistance. They had not expected Baratheon banners beside them. The battle for Winterfell was brutal and chaotic. Snow turned red in minutes. Northern fought Northern. Old loyalties shattered. Roose Bolton commanded from the rear, calm even as reports of Baratheon reinforcements reached him. "So," he murmured softly, "the wolf and stag remember their arrangement." He attempted retreat when the tide turned. He did not make it far. Greatjon Umber personally dragged him before Robb and Stannis in the courtyard of Winterfell as fighting died down. Roose's pale face remained eerily calm despite the blood around him. "You see," he said quietly to Robb, "this is what comes of divided rule." Robb looked down at him, pain and fury mixing in his eyes. "You divided it." Roose gave the smallest shrug. Stannis stepped forward. "Treason against the crown," he said coldly. "And against the North," Robb added. For once, there was no disagreement between them. Roose Bolton was executed before sunset. Not burned. Not tortured. Simply ended. The North watched carefully. And something shifted. After the battle, Robb and Stannis stood alone in the godswood of Winterfell. Snow rested softly on branches above them. "No more justiciars," Robb said quietly. Stannis exhaled slowly. "No more divided authority." They understood now what pride had nearly destroyed. "The North will remain under House Stark," Stannis said, "with full internal rule." "And I will stand with you as warden," Robb answered, "not rival." It was not perfect trust, but it was forged in blood. Far in the west, Tywin Lannister received news of Bolton's death and the reunited alliance. For the first time since losing King's Landing, he felt something rare. defeat. They chose each other, he murmured. And lions, no matter how proud, could not fight the entire realm alone. Years later, Meisters would write about that winter. They would say the alliance between the wolf and the stag nearly shattered the seven kingdoms. They would say pride almost destroyed two honorable men. But they would also say this, that when faced with true betrayal, they remembered who the real enemy was. Robb Stark never wore a crown again. He did not need to. And Stannis Baratheon ruled a harder, colder kingdom than any before him, but a more united one. Because sometimes the most dangerous enemy is not the one across the battlefield. It is the one growing in the silence between allies. And that winter, the wolf and the stag learned that lesson before it was too late.